The Autoimmune Connection is a web series dedicated to all things autoimmune, with hosts Christina Feindel of A Clean Plate, Emma King of The Bacon Mum, Kate J. of Healing Family Eats, and Rory Linehan of The Perillo PI, interviewing new guests every episode. We're bringing patients, practitioners, friends, and family together to connect the dots between diet, lifestyle, and autoimmune disease.
I'm your host, Rory Linehan of the Perillo PI, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today and with our amazing panel. Today joining me we have Sue Vennerholm from Backcountry Perillo, Vanessa Colleran from True North AIP, Samantha McClellan from Sweet Potato and Social Change, and Tara Perillo of the Perillo Cajun Lady. Welcome everybody.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
This is my third outing on the Autoimmune Connection, but my first as host. That said, I'll keep it short because I'm sure many people would have heard my story before. I have been on the Paleo Autoimmune Protocol for the past 18 months, and I've been blogging from the Paleo PI for 12 of those months. I originally found the Autoimmune Protocol through Sarah Ballantyne and her work at the Paleo Mum, but also through my not-so-secret crush in the paleo world of Terry Walls and her amazing work. I haven't been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, but the Autoimmune Protocol has changed my life profoundly for the better. Before I embraced the Autoimmune Protocol, my health was really spiraling out of control, and I was quite worried for the future and what this would mean for me. But since being on the Autoimmune Protocol, I've reversed a number of the symptoms that I had, and I've been able to stop the progression of all of my symptoms, which has been very profound and very empowering. But before we dive into today's subject, let's get to know our panel a little better, and maybe if we can start with you, Tara. Just tell us a little bit about your journey to the AIP, your autoimmune diagnosis, if you have one, and anything else you'd like to tell us.
Okie dokie. Well, I'm Tara Perillo, and I blog at Paleo Cajun Lady. I was diagnosed in late 2013 with lupus and psoriasis. That was my second and third autoimmune disease diagnosis, so I thought I better do something about it, and I figured I'd switch to better nutrition. And luckily for me, around the same time, Sarah Ballantyne's book, The Paleo Approach, came out, and I embraced it immediately and started noticing some really, really good changes with my symptoms. So I continued on and was able to actually go into a pretty full remission at the middle of last year, and was able to stay that way for a while. And then I've had a couple of flares since then, but each time I noticed that they're so much easier to manage, and also I don't have the organ damage that I had previously when I would have a flare. So I've been able to, keep my bits and pieces okay since then. And so I love the AIP, and I'm so happy I found it, and I'm so happy I found Sarah Ballantyne's book. And that's about it for me.
Well, we love you, Tara, and we're very happy to have you on the Autoimmune Connection. Thank you for sharing your story. Samantha, do you want to go next?
Sure. I blog over at Sweet Potatoes and Social Change, where I have been for about 2 years now. And in 2011, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is my primary autoimmune diagnosis. And after about 6 months of just being on the medication and doing what the doctor had told me, I came across the paleo diet and started it. And I used the paleo diet in conjunction with my medication to achieve remission for about 1.5 years. And then because of stress, like we will talk about here shortly, I did go into a pretty severe flare that lasted over 6 months and left me basically bedridden because of how sick it had made me and the damage that it had done. So I really was just kind of at a place of desperation, and there really weren't a lot of books out at the time about the autoimmune protocol or anything like that. But I just was doing my research, and I found this tiny little tidbit that directed me over to Sarah Ballantyne's blog, and I did a little research and decided I would give it a shot as my last attempt before either going on some really serious meds that had some scary side effects or getting my colon removed at the ripe old age of 23. And since then, I really haven't looked back. It's helped my overall health tremendously in ways I really didn't expect, and then helped the ulcerative colitis tremendously. I was able to go back into remission with the autoimmune protocol, and I've had one flare since then because of stress. And like Tara said, the difference was incredible just to see how much easier it was to manage and how more little damage that it did than before. So definitely, you can definitely tell that the diet and lifestyle changes have made a big difference. So. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And as we'll get into later, stress management is just so critical when it comes to managing chronic illness. And I think a lot of people out there, maybe when they start paleo, don't quite realize that it is almost as important, if not as important, as diet and nutrition. So thank you for pointing that out, Samantha.
Yep.
Sue, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Susan Vennerholm, and I blog over at Backcountry Paleo. And I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in 2012, and that's autoimmune hypothyroid. And about the 6 years prior to that, I was experiencing a lot of symptoms that I had no idea the source for. Severe exhaustion, increasing depression, getting sick a lot, and a lot of brain function stuff where I could think straight, foggy brain. After my diagnosis, my doctor started me on adrenal and thyroid support. However, we didn't address the autoimmunity really. And I crashed really hard, and I ended up bedridden, couldn't work, couldn't exercise for about 4 years. And I had really severe brain function problems. And I lucked upon the wonderful autoimmune community of patients online who referred me to some resources, including Dr. Datis Karazian's blog, The Paleo Mom, and Autoimmune Paleo blog. And I learned about the AIP, and I decided to go on it. And the transformation that happened for me was profound and really fast, and I feel really fortunate. Within about 2 weeks, my debilitating brain fog was completely gone. I couldn't even read the back of a cereal box at that point. It was horrible. My brain fog, depression mostly went away, symptoms disappeared, and this is all within 2 or 3 weeks. And so then over the next year and a half, I had some lingering symptoms that ended up being taken care of by doing some neurotransmitter support. And so my life has been really transformed by going on the AIP, not only the diet part, as far as the actual foods, but also doing for micronutrient deficiencies and a lot of lifestyle stuff to support my adrenal health and my blood sugar stability. And so I finally got back into doing outdoor stuff, which is where my love is. I'm a mountaineer and climber, and I got back into doing that about a year and a half ago, and I'm stronger now than I was 10 years ago. So I'm really thankful that I had those resources.
Thank you so much, Sue, and I'm really glad to hear that the healing's been so profound for you, and anyone that is into outdoors and nature. I really encourage you to go and check out Sue's blog. It is absolutely amazing. The imagery on that blog just makes me want to get outside and climb some mountains. So yeah, thanks, Sue. Vanessa, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Vanessa, and I blog over at True North AIP. And I was diagnosed about 9 years ago with psoriasis as well as Raynaud's syndrome. And for about 6 years, I tried pretty much everything you could ever imagine to try to improve my symptoms. I had a huge list of problems that just seemed to be getting longer and longer, the list of issues that I had, and it really concerned me. I was a new mom to 2 little boys, and I was just rapidly seeing my health decline and wanting desperately to do something about it. I guess about 6 years into my autoimmune diseases, I hit what you would call a bit of a rock bottom, where I was having troubles getting out of bed. I was having troubles getting through the day. Just making a simple meal for my kids just seemed like I was climbing a mountain. And it just scared me. And so I did what I knew best at that time, which was to get on the internet and start doing some digging. And I came across Terry Wall's podcast on her TED Talk. And that started me thinking about nutrition as far as being a piece to getting myself better. So I started making some changes with my diet at that time, as well as the diet of my children. And a few months after that, I stumbled upon Sarah's website, the Perillo Mom's website. And about a week later, I was full elimination phase AIP. And within 1 to 2 weeks of doing that, I noticed such a profound difference in my overall health and energy and mood, and I was functioning again, and I felt like a normal person again, and I wasn't having the major brain fog that was just crippling for me at that time. So I knew I was finally on the right path. And I did strict elimination AIP for about 2 years. And while I noticed a large improvement in a number of my health problems, my main AIP or autoimmune issues weren't really resolving as I would have expected them to. So I dug a little deeper and then got diagnosed with chronic Lyme disease. And so in the last year, I've been combining the AIP paleo diet along with some Lyme disease treatments. And that sort of brings me where I am today. So it's been about 3 years now being on autoimmune protocol.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Vanessa. And again, I encourage anyone with Lyme disease to go and check out Vanessa's blog. I know that quite a lot of people in the community have been affected by it. And yeah, go check out Vanessa's story. It's well worth it. So let's dive into today's topic. And today we'll be talking about stress management, as we've alluded to earlier. It's one that we're all affected by. As humans, we need stress. It's a strange thing to say, but we do need stress. If you think about the exercise that we do and the stress that puts on the muscles, you need that stress in order for the muscles to get bigger and adapt to the exercise you're doing. Conversely, we need mental stress. If you think about when you're solving complex problems, you're using your brain, it is putting stress on it, and it helps it to grow and create new pathways. So stress is something that we've always had as human beings, and it's something that we do need to thrive. The issue that we have at the moment is chronic stress. It isn't acute anymore like it most likely was in the past. We're surrounded by it all the time. So if you think of, you know, the alarm clock that wakes you up in the morning, that can be stressful. The traffic on the way to work, that can be stressful. Deadlines, picking up kids from school, all of these things are creating an environment where stress is becoming a chronic issue. And as Sarah Ballantyne of the Paleo Mum says in her book, The Paleo Approach, if you don't manage stress, it will completely undermine all of the positive changes you make. I can't stress, pardon the pun, enough how important this topic is. So let's dive right into it and get some of the wisdom from our panel. My first question is, how has excess stress impacted your health, and what are some of the typical sources of this stress? And we'll keep the same order as before, so Tara, when you're ready.
Okay. Well, for me personally, my stress is typically traumatic stress, because through the years 2001 through 2009, I experienced, the death of my grandparents, which they raised me, so they were like my parents. I lost a baby. I lost my puppy. So it was a lot of trauma over 8 years that really took hold of my life and basically led to my being diagnosed with PTSD in 2012. And for me, I have to keep stress at bay, because I believe that it's helped to lead to my lupus diagnosis. I do believe there is a huge link between stress and autoimmune disease. So it is best if we manage stress, and even our everyday stressors, like we get so bogged down with anything as much as a move, having children, which I know that as well. It can be stressful with our schedules today, then with what's going on in the world today. And we really need to learn how to manage it, because otherwise it can affect your body in many ways. One of those ways, like I said, I believe is linked to autoimmune disease, and even everyday stress, I think, is linked to it. So I think what we need to do is realize that we have to slow down, because it can affect you later in the future, and you have to really, figure out what's going to be best for you and practice those techniques.
Thank you, Tara. And it's a very good point you touch on about that build-up of stress. I mean, when I think of stress, I think of something coming at me very quickly at that moment in time, but we often don't think about how stress can build up, and even how traumatic events can create this build-up of stress. And we all need to find ways to deal with that for our health, which we'll touch on later. Samantha, did you want to go next?
Yeah. Stress has been a huge trigger in play with my autoimmune disease, and that was a fact that I really resisted a lot at the beginning of my diagnosis, because I didn't want to feel like, my emotions were causing me to be ill. And I was like, I got this. I was a very type A, kind of workaholic type person, and I didn't like to admit that stress had any effect on me. But over the years, I have become much wiser to the fact that that is not true. So the type of stress that tends to affect my health the most negatively is just chronic life stress. And when I was originally diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in 2011, I had been working at a very high stress job for a while that had negatively impacted my health. Then I'm sure led to my initial diagnosis, and then life calmed down. I was able to get into remission, and then I had a really, really crazy year that led to that really bad flare that I referenced earlier. I had gotten married. I moved the day after I got married, which is not something I would ever recommend to anyone. And just kind of our first year of being married was really stressful. Both my husband and I were in graduate school at the same time. Our finances were super tight. His job, which was our primary income source, was falling apart. We had deaths in the family, and everyone has years like that things just add up. And I really tried to just keep it all together. And what I have found, just as a random interesting tidbit for me, is my body will know almost if I'm in the stressful period that I can't really handle getting sick. And then as soon as things start to get a little bit better, is always when I get sick. And I do not know why. I've theorized on some like cortisol level things, but I don't know why that is. But the stress would just really accumulate and take a toll, and then I would have just kind of this rebound effect flare. And really, then I started at AIP, and I think it was enough to help me recover the health that I could have, but we were still living in this very stressful time, and I could still see the effects of it. I really did not have a lot of luck reintroducing things right in the early part, just because I still had this stress that was fighting against the healing that I was trying to do with the dietary changes. So I just kind of gave up reintroducing things for a while until I felt like life was going to calm down. And then again, my husband finished graduate school, and we were going to be moving. We moved 2 weeks before this past Christmas, and that was, again, very stressful, and I had a better idea of what was going on with my body at that point, and could tell the effects that the stress was having on me much sooner and could get a better handle on it. But I wasn't able to make it through that entirely without having a flare, just because the stress, had taken its toll and really still affected my autoimmune disease. But I was much better able to handle it and recognize it at this point than I had been in the past. So stress definitely has been a huge trigger, and I resented the fact that my doctors would always tell me that stress was the only reason that I would have an autoimmune flare, and I've learned that is not true in and of itself now, but it's definitely a big factor, and something that has been a lot harder for me to work on than just changing my diet. So, yeah.
Thank you, Samantha. And it's really interesting what you touch on about falling sick after periods of stress, that your body's able to get through that period and then afterwards fall sick. I know a lot of people in the community are the same, and I see a lot of my friends and family are the same. For me personally, I have the opposite experience. When my body starts to get stressed, it shuts down almost. It's like you have to get away from this stressful situation, and that's all I can focus on. So it's interesting that we both approach it from different angles, and it's just a natural thing that happens.
Yeah.
So Vanessa.
Yes, so stress definitely played a huge part in developing my autoimmune diseases, I have no doubt. Prior to my symptoms showing up, I was living a pretty unhealthy lifestyle. I'm a veterinary technician, so I was working in emergency hospitals doing graveyard shifts, and my sleep schedule was just so mismanaged. I was, running on a few hours of sleep every 24 hours. I was living on coffee. I was not living on nutrient-dense foods. I was doing everything the opposite that you should be doing to maintain your good health. And then, but I was still functioning. I was still managing. And then a series of very stressful events happened in my life, too, over a very short period of time. And that's when my symptoms showed up. And now looking back, I know that definitely was sort of the final straw for me, I guess, the one big trigger that progressed my ill health into a full-blown autoimmune disease flare-up, I guess, if you will. The interesting thing for me, being on the autoimmune protocol for as long as I have been, after 2 years of really having the diet dialed in and figuring out that I was doing everything that I could, I realized that I wasn't doing probably the most important thing for my health and my healing, which was stress management. And I proved it to myself when I moved about 2 years into the autoimmune protocol, and I had another huge flare. So, just because you have the diet dialed in and you figured out what foods might work for you and what foods might not work for you, if you really don't have an understanding of what stress does for you personally, then I'm not sure that you're going to see that level of healing that you might want to, achieve. So that's been the biggest eye-opening experience for me. And hands down, it's been the hardest thing for me to learn. And I'm not going to lie, I struggle with it every single day. I have 2 little kids, and I have a husband who's gone a lot. And, just the basic day-to-dayness of my life is stressful. 3 meals a day and taking the kids here and there. And then, of course, I'm in and out of doctor's appointments, and having an autoimmune disease in itself is stressful. So, just the basics can really be hard for me. And then if you throw in the unexpected things, that will really take me out if I'm not careful, I realize now. And I'm like you, Rory, too. Like, I see stress coming my way, and I run and hide and shut down. And so for me, the whole learning experience has been extremely important over stress management, almost more so than the diet piece, honestly.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for that, Vanessa. And it's really interesting that you touch on how our lifestyles, the autoimmune protocol, on the autoimmune protocol, can be stressful in and to themselves. As you mentioned, you're running a family, your husband's often away, you're cooking meals, you're going to doctor's appointments. That's a lot for one person. And so later on, I'd be fascinated to see your tips on how to cope with that and make sure that the stress doesn't build up.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get there, a question on how diet and stress play out together. One of the ways.
That too, Rory? Can I answer that one too?
Oh, my apologies.
Is that okay? I just wanted to chime in on the theme of how chronic stress can totally undermine everything else you're trying to do to heal from your condition. And I need to clarify something. I stated before that I was diagnosed in 2012. That's actually when I started AIP. I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in 2008. So putting that in perspective, when I got diagnosed, we were just working on thyroid hormones and my adrenals, and I was under an incredible amount of stress. I was a high-altitude trail runner, mountaineer. I was working 3 jobs at a time in a ski town in a very dysfunctional, stressful relationship. There were family problems in my born family, and I was driving myself into the ground, and I had this impression that I could push through it all. And I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, knowing that I was under stress, but never having really dealt with stress before in a proactive way. I just sort of shoved it aside. And I kind of felt like I was invincible, because that had worked for me up until that point. But what I didn't realize is I was driving my adrenals into the ground. I was actually eating a diet that was supporting my micronutrient deficiencies, and I thought I was eating well. And I wasn't listening to all these obvious signs that I was about to crash hard. And this is before I even knew I had an autoimmune condition that mattered. And then when I had my diagnosis, some of those stresses were still in place. There were things I couldn't change, and I couldn't do anything about them. And it was until they went away that my healing really began. And it's a real challenge, because I still have that nature to push, 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 and feel like I'm invincible. And it's been a real learning curve to listen to my body and respect what it's telling me right now, instead of saying, no, I can do that in a week. If I push like that now, it takes me weeks or months to catch up. And it's learning a new conversation with my body, and a new sense of respect for how my environment affects me. And I think that that's really key for people with any chronic condition, where you have to live your life. You really have to change your relationship with how you listen to your body. And even nowadays, I have to be very strict with myself. I used to stress head on, and I had to go into this coping phase where I just run away from it, like 2 of you have said. And I think we can reach where we take the stress off, so no one to just put the hand up and go, I'm not dealing with this. I'm cutting this factor out of my life, and it's not a stress factor anymore, because we take on too much in this busy lifestyle. So.
And I know that you have had issue with your adrenals and cortisol in the past, and just for people maybe who don't know, cortisol is one of the mechanisms that can really throw out a lot of systems in the body that is directly impacted by stress. So what should happen ordinarily with our cortisol levels, they should be the highest in the morning when we wake up, and then during the day they should slowly taper off so we can then fall asleep at night time. Stress comes in and it can wreak a lot of havoc on cortisol, so it can spike at certain periods of the day, including before bed, can impact sleep, and it can be a vicious cycle. So you've had issues with that, and have you dealt with those issues successfully, have you found? Or?
Yeah, it's an ongoing maintenance thing, though. You know, I have gotten my adrenal function, which is very closely tied to blood glucose stability. I've gotten both of those factors very stabilized. However, when I don't behave and I start taking on too much, or I ignore the signals that my body is giving me that I need to rest and sleep and kind of put that hand up, I pay for it. So it's not a free ticket. You know, when it's maintained and stabilized, it's definitely not a free ticket to just live like you did before. It really means a change in lifestyle, a really positive one. And I think that, you know, self-awareness on a daily basis around the stress is what can help you maintain, you know, the improvement. So.
Thank you. And so let's get into how diet and stress play out. One of the mechanisms people use to cope with stress, not just in the autoimmune community, but in the wider community, is using food as a coping mechanism. So often people use food as comfort, and after days of stress they'll come home, they'll eat, and obviously we know eating the wrong kinds of food can also wreak havoc on your health. So my question is, do you find it harder to stay on the autoimmune protocol when you are stressed, or do you crave comfort foods? And how do you stay on track during these times? And we'll start with you, Tara.
Okay. Well, I've never been a stress eater. I know you all hate me, whatever. but I never really did. I've basically been in fitness for most of my life, so I really know how to control my diet that way, so I'm lucky. But for me, when I do get stressed, what I'll start doing is craving the foods from home. So I'll start craving Cajun food, you know, and I want some crawfish, and I want give me some, you know, good gumbo or whatnot. And you really can't make an exact gumbo because you can't make the roux without the flour. And believe me, coconut flour does not work the same. So, the way I manage it is I just substitute. You know, I try to make the dishes that I remember and that I want to eat, but I make them compliant with AIP. So I figured out how to make shrimp and okra gumbo without the roux, and it tastes really good. So for me, I'll just, you know, substitute and learn how to make the foods that I really crave, and make sure you really crave them. You know, sometimes it's just a memory. You're like, I'm in a stressful situation, so it's a memory that, hey, a cupcake tasted really good the last time I was in a stressful situation. So if you want a cupcake, make one, but make one that's AIP compliant. And I find that that's the best way to handle the situation, because then you're not leaving the AIP, and you're still giving in to yourself, because you really do, if you're in, you know, stress, you want to be nice to yourself, and so give in, but give in AIP, and that's what works for me.
I love that ending that you had there. That's really profound. I mean, some of us we crave certain foods when we're in stressful situations, and the worst thing that you can do is beat up on yourself on top of the stress that you're already having. So finding a way to do that still works with the autoimmune protocol. I love that, Tara, so thank you. And Samantha.
Yeah, I also, like Tara, am not naturally a stress eater. So it's not, I don't immediately find myself going and trying to overeat or eat certain things when I'm stressed out. the thing that I found, especially with our most recent move-related stress, was that I miss the convenience of non-AIP foods, and I find myself getting a lot more frustrated than I normally do about the fact that I have to cook everything. So what I did in that situation was to just find myself a few little outlets that were AIP friendly enough for me that gave me a little bit of relief from having to cook during times when there's other things going on and I'm stressed out. I still had to cook plenty, and I'm a big proponent of batch cooking. So when I talk about having to cook, I'm mostly talking about dinner because I do make my breakfasts and my lunches for the week ahead of time, so that's not as much of an issue. But I was able to find like the rotisserie chicken that they sell at the grocery store. I was able to find one at Whole Foods that just had salt and pepper on it, which pepper for me was okay. And I think they had plain ones too. So there was a couple nights where I was like, just go get one of those chickens so that we have something to eat and I don't need to cook. And I had a couple of restaurants that I had been able to eat out at without having a reaction and things like that. So I allowed myself to utilize those resources more than I would normally when I was not in stress, to kind of take a little something off of my plate. And like Tara said, I don't necessarily go to food when I'm stressed out, but I will find myself craving some more comforting foods, maybe more carbs than I would normally have, or sugar. And I try to be really mindful of those things and not overdoing them, but at the same time, you know, I wanted to watch the Academy Awards last weekend, and I wanted to have a treat while I did it, so I made some carob chunk cookies, and they were delicious, and I enjoyed them. But they were AIP friendly, so you know, you are still setting yourself up for success and not, you know, just immediately kind of bailing and falling off the wagon because of stress, because that's not going to help anything in the long run. So I think figuring out what the underlying issue is, why you're craving food, whether it's for convenience or the food itself or the comforting nature of it, is important. But my thing always tends to be not wanting to have to cook when I'm stressed out, so I find ways around that.
Thank you. And I think that's really important as well, having those outlets so that the stress doesn't build up, especially in our really busy lifestyles when you're cooking all the time. I mean, people shouldn't feel like they have to cook every single meal. It can be quite taxing, and so to be able to go and get the chicken from Whole Foods, or for me, it's going to get the kombucha from the health food store rather than fermenting my own batch. It just helps make the lifestyle a lot easier. So Sue, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I am a stress eater. I tend to go toward carbs and sugars when I'm really stressed out, and it's a real battle because for years that's how I coped. And those are the years before I really, really crashed hard, and so there's that ingrained habit. I don't keep processed sugars around the house anymore. I have an occasional chocolate bar that I only get 1 square of at a time. I tested fine for that. But I find that I still have that tendency, and because I had such a problem with my adrenal function and my blood sugar stability, and those are really closely tied together, I have to be careful about binging on carbs and sugar. And so for me, when I'm stressed out, I get tired, I don't want to cook, my brain doesn't function as well, and it's really easy to just go down that rabbit hole. And so what I do instead is I do a lot of batch cooking, and I always keep something in the freezer that's really protein and fat strong that I can pull out when I just so, screw it, I'm not going to cook. Because if I don't have that there, I may end up getting in a pattern where I am eating way too much in the way of enough protein and fat, and it's just like this downhill slope. So I know that that's still a risk for me, and I have to take care of myself by doing the batch cook and having it just set aside. And I grab stuff unless it really is sort of an emergency moment. And I've definitely paid the price. I've gone down the hole a few times in the past 2 years, and it takes me weeks sometimes to recover from just binging on carbs. I'm talking, you know, I'm not talking grain carbs. I haven't had grains in over 2 years, but, you know, plantains, etc. So it's an awareness for me, and I think heading towards, and it's just a lifestyle where I have to be aware that what are the warning signs and how am I going to prepare for it ahead of time. Batch cooking, basically. Yeah.
I had the strangest desire to give you a high five when you said you're a binge eater. I was like, yes, me too, team binge eater. Not that, you know, that's something to celebrate, but it's great that you've got those strategies in place.
And actually, the one thing that really keeps me from going back there, the main thing is that when I want to reach for something that's really sugary, all I have to do is remember how horribly sick I was before I went on AIP, and that will stop my hand. It's just not worth it, never worth it for me. I know there are people who fall off the wagon all the time, but I'm too scared. So.
Totally, and especially when you've gone through so much healing and you're feeling so good on a daily basis, that's one of the things I struggle with, is that, you know, I almost forget what it was like to be as ill as what I was before I started the AIP. And then it'll just take, you know, one binge eating session, and I'm like, okay, I remember. I won't be doing this again for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
Vanessa.
Yeah, so I can totally relate to what you and Susan have just been talking about. I, too, am a stress eater. I guess if I would admit it, I am a binge eater as well. And I go straight for the sugar. And it's almost like, it's really interesting now that I have sort of an awareness of stress levels and how that affects me on a day-to-day basis. I can almost tell when my stress is creeping up by when I start craving the sweet foods. And so, you know, it's been really neat to sort of learn how one influences the other and just pay attention to my body and the signals that it's giving off. And it's actually helped me to realize, oh, wait a minute, you know, maybe I'm not managing my stress right now because I am searching my cupboards through, you know, trying to look for the sweetest thing possible that I can find to shove in my mouth. So, you know, the other thing that has really been interesting for me is I had to have a really long, honest look at myself and talk with myself, because I realized I'd gotten into some pretty bad patterns of behavior. And one of them that I still struggle with is that, you know, I think this developed when my kids were really little, because I didn't have time in the day to eat a lot. So after they would go to bed, that was like my free license to chow down. So I would go into the kitchen and I would grab as much food as I possibly could. It always involved a huge bowl of ice cream, you know, right before I'd go to bed. And I still, to this day, have those same desires at the end of the day. I don't know, I guess it's just a stress release for me. I feel like, you know, at the end of the day, I want to sit down and I want to relax. And to me, that looks like eating something tasty. So what I had to do to make sure that I didn't derail myself completely was to learn how to be really honest with myself about whether I was actually hungry or not, and if I was eating out of hunger or if I was just eating out of that stress response from a busy day or a stressful day. And sometimes just having that moment of clarity for me has helped and stopped me in my tracks to realize that, hey, you know, you're not actually hungry because you've just had an enormous plate of food for dinner. So let's maybe reach for something else instead of, you know, that sweeter treat that I might go for. And then the other part of that is that if I really am hungry and I want to have that sweet treat, I try to make it obviously AIP compliant. So something as simple as having like a sweet cup of herbal tea sometimes can be enough for me at the end of the day. Or a bowl of frozen berries is, you know, something that I've learned that is enough like ice cream to make me happy. So basically what I had to do, like I said, was be honest with myself, and then at the end of it all, just be kind with myself and realize that if I was going to beat myself up over this part of who I am, I'm going to be adding on way more stress than is necessary. So that's just who I am, and as long as I can manage to differentiate between whether I'm actually hungry or craving it because of stress, and then make the right choices if I do reach for food, then I feel like I've been successful in managing it.
Well, thank you. And one of the things you mentioned earlier is that sometimes that you're not even aware that you can be stressed, and it's not until you're reaching for that food you're like, well, hold on, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And I can so relate to that. It happens to me all the time. I don't have a great self-awareness of when the stress is building up, and it's not until I start to look at my behaviors and I'm like, oh, hold on, there's something not right here. Let's troubleshoot.
Yeah, totally. Same.
Awesome. Okay, so we're running a little bit over time. So what we'll do is we'll go to the last question, just tips for managing stress, and I'll get maybe your top 3 tips for managing stress, starting with you, Tara.
Okay, so one of the things I enjoy the most and helps me with my stress so much is yoga. And I've been a yoga instructor for, gosh, 15 years now. Wow. And there's just, anyone can do yoga, okay? You don't have to worry about, you know, oh, I have to do everything perfectly. And no, yoga's not about that. It's about finding your place, centering yourself, and finding positions and comfort. And it has just been instrumental in helping me, you know, keep my stress to a minimum. So I try to do it as often as I possibly can. So that's my number 1. My number 2 is, it's something that I've had to learn through dealing with PTSD. And it's basically called disassociation. And what you have to remember is when things are happening to you, especially in stress, you know, trauma situations, you have to not internalize things, and you have to learn how to disassociate yourself from what's happening. So if, say, a good friend of yours comes to you and they're sick, or they just got a, you know, autoimmune diagnosis, you have to realize that this is not about you. This is about them, and they need you right now, and you have to be at your strongest. So don't internalize that and start thinking, oh, you know, I'm suffering, and because you have to put yourself aside and, you know, not take on their stress onto yourself. So you only deal with your own stresses. And you help people, but you let them deal with their own stress. Do not take on their stress, and do not internalize it. And that's another thing too. My other suggestion is, do not internalize. Try to keep each stress, you know it's happening, and know that you're dealing with it, but at the same time, just find relaxation for yourself, and don't be in denial about it, and do know that there are things that are simply out of your control and that you cannot control, so sometimes you do have to let them go, and try to remove yourself from as much negativity as possible. You know, I've had to leave some friendships behind. I've had to leave some acquaintances behind because they weren't being, you know, as they were being negative, basically. And I couldn't deal with that in my life. Not then, not now, because I needed a more positive outlook. So surround yourself with positive people. Surround yourself with people who want to help you. The AIP community has been so helpful to me because it's people who tend to bring each other up. And there's not you know, anyone who's trying to tear people down, and you know, it's a lovely community. So I say get involved in, especially, you know, the AIP community, because it is so nice to have someone else that is going through what you're going through, and they can, you know, not commiserate with you, because I don't like that word, but they can understand you, and then they can also offer help, and they can offer support. And I think when you're going through stress, especially with an autoimmune disease, you need that support. And so definitely join up with the AIP community. They are fabulous, wonderful people, like you guys.
Oh, thank you. I really just wanted to touch on that point. You're saying the people around you and those relationships are quite important to manage stress. Because they're saying that you're the sum of the 5 closest people around you. So if you take a look at your 5 closest relationships, if they're all healthy and positive, you know, that's great. I think you're on the right track. But if some of them are toxic and they're causing you stress, you might need to reevaluate those, which can be difficult initially. And it doesn't mean that that person that you're reevaluating that relationship is necessarily a bad person. It might just be that the dynamic of the relationship isn't working so well. So thank you for pointing that out, Tara.
Very true. Thank you.
Samantha.
Yeah. My top techniques, I guess, for managing stress has been, the first one would probably be along the lines of what you're saying in terms of setting healthy boundaries and prioritizing my health. And that was something that was very hard for me, because I don't like to be a person that says, you know, I need to make like a special accommodation for myself. And it was really hard to learn that and to prioritize me, because sometimes that doesn't go over great with other people if they don't necessarily understand where you're coming from. And I mean, what that looked like was, you know, traveling is very hard for me and tends to be a potential trigger. And I've been able to learn techniques to make it not as much of a trigger. But when I travel, I have to advocate for myself, and I have to say, you know, I need to stay in a place that's going to be healthy for me. I need to take time away from whatever the activities are that we're doing or the reason we're traveling, and make sure that I'm taking care of myself. You know, I have to prioritize my ability to eat the food that I need to eat. And sometimes that means not staying with people who want me to stay with them. And that's really difficult. And I mean, I try to explain it as best as I can and things like that. But I really had to learn that I needed to do, you know, what was going to be best for my health, and to try to just be honest with people and vulnerable with people and say, look, this is what I'm going through, and it's either don't travel at all or don't do an activity at all, or do it in a way that's going to be healthy. And I had to learn how to exercise my no muscle, and you know, there's people who say, you know, oh, can you do such and such? You know, I have people all the time. My husband works in a church, and I have people all the time. They're like, can you be on this committee, or can you help me with this? And sometimes I say yes because I'm really happy to help them, and sometimes I have to say no. And it's hard to say no because I'm, you know, having some health issues right now, or I need to take some time away and take care of myself. But that is what I have to do, and that's been a really valuable lesson. And outside of that, the thing that helped me the most when I was moving, and you're kind of going through periods, especially of just acute stress, was to think of like 4 or 5 small things that I could do during the day that were going to help me feel like I was managing my stress or taking care of myself, and to really kind of put them in a to-do list. I'm a very big, like I said, I'm a very type A person, so I make my to-do list and I like to check things off. So if it's on my list, I will probably get it done. And I had to kind of factor my stress management into my list. So for me, what that looked like is, you know, spend 15 minutes outside. take a Epsom salt bath, you know, do one of my meditation tracks, take a 20-minute nap if you can. And I would try to intersperse them throughout the day so that things weren't building up and becoming as cumulative. I was able to take small breaks throughout the day to take care of myself rather than just going until I crashed and then having to take 6 months off of my life. It's a lot easier to take 20-minute breaks here and there and help feel like you're taking care of yourself. And that was something that was pretty effective for me. So those would be my primary tips.
Thanks, Samantha. And I really like that one about learning to say no. Still something that I struggle with to this day. It's really difficult to not be a part of activities maybe that you do want to be a part of, or you want to help people out, but at the same time, if you're not in good health, then how can you expect to ever help others? So it's that balance. So thank you for pointing that out. And Sue?
Yeah, I think a really good tool is to sit down and have a real honest talk with yourself about what are all the stress factors in your life, whether it's a job, a relationship, a person, a commitment, the noise of the highway outside your house, whatever, and write it down and really cover all the bases. And it's surprising sometimes what you dig up, and then to take a really honest look at that list and say, which of these things can I just get rid of? Situations, it may be friendships, like some, you know, others have already mentioned. Sometimes you have to break up with friends, and decide what things you can eliminate and do so. How can you reduce them? If there's a stress factor that can't go away, how can you reduce it so it's more manageable? And then once you get that dialed in, which is really hard to do because it's a big reality check and it takes a lot of courage, but if you can manage that, once you do that, then from that point on, trying to be really mindful of what else you take on and really setting boundaries. And I think Samantha mentioned this, where it's about your own health and your own self-care, and you make that a priority. So you set this limit for yourself, like, okay, can I add this to my list, yes or no? And then you go on from there. So that's my first one. Secondly, I think that a lot of people forget, they think of stress management as external, managing factors. That's true, there are many external. We also need to remember to support our bodies in ways that they can deal with the stress, because the stress response is a physiological process. And so doing things such as supporting the adrenal health, you know, if you need to get your adrenals tested, do so. If you need to be on supplementation for that, do so. And learn the lifestyle habit. Same thing goes for blood sugar stability. They're very hand in hand. You know, on the blood sugar and adrenal thing, being really good with your diet. You know, start your day with a breakfast that's high in protein and fat, not a lot of sugars. Don't eat sugars before lunch. Eat frequent food and always include protein, and have a lot of healthy fats. So all those eating habits support your physiological ability to handle the stress. And then my last one is just sleep. Sleep a lot. And I know it's really hard if you have kids or a really demanding job with a schedule, but do everything you can to get sleep and make it a #1 priority, because it's huge and it makes such a difference. So those are my 3.
Thanks, Sue. I love sleep, so I'm with you on that one. The more sleep, the better. Vanessa, we'll finish up with you.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely going to reiterate a few things that have already been said. Sleep was absolutely one of my 3, and you know, another area that I definitely struggle with, but I have found that if I can get that under control, I'm so much more able to function the next day and handle stress. So I think it's worth mentioning again, sleep, and more sleep. I also think it's very individual. So what works for one is not going to work for another person. And I made the mistake when I was working on the stress management piece was to try to implement all the things that I knew were going to be good for me, like the yoga and the meditation, and I literally just stressed myself out trying to incorporate all these things into my day. I thought, well, this is crazy. This is the opposite of what should be happening. So I had to sort of stop and take a realistic look at my life and what I was able to do with, you know, everything else that I have going on at the moment with kids and juggling the household and stuff like that. So I approached it from a different way, and I too learned how to say no. I am definitely that type A personality as well, and that was a very, very hard thing for me to learn how to do, and I think it still is a work in progress, to be honest. But now I have just sort of, that's my default answer instead of yes to things that I'm asked to do. I generally now say no first, and then I might give it some time and think about it and look at my schedule, and I might change my mind and be able to actually accommodate that request down the road. But I definitely know that my plate right now is very full, and so generally I'm not going to have much room in my days to do other things. So saying no is a important and hard skill to learn for sure. And I guess the other thing that I've allowed myself to do is to change my schedule at a drop of a hat. So I'm a to-do lister as well. I like to have my days set out and know exactly what's going to happen. And of course, juggling kids and schedules and stuff like that, there's lots of appointments that happen in a week. But then life happens as well. And before you know it, somebody's going to be sick, or your sink's going to, clog, or somebody else in the family is going to be sick, or something else is going to happen in your day or your week that's going to derail you in a way if you let it. And that used to send me into an absolute tailspin, because everything that I had planned I couldn't do anymore, yet I would still try to get them done. So now I just give myself that license to go into what I call survival mode, which is basically I get on the phone, I cancel appointments, I call in family to help me out, I drop anything that's not essential, and I get down just to the bare basics, which for me is 3 meals a day, making sure my kids are taken care of, and then I ride through the storm, however long it lasts, and then I can get back on track again. And I don't take that as a sign that I failed in any way. Kind of myself that life happens, and sometimes you gotta change your plans. That's all I can think of, besides all the other amazing things that were mentioned.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. And that last point you made, I mean, I'm still working on that, like trying not to beat myself up when I do have to lower my level of activity. Just this week at my 9-to-5 job, I could feel for a while that things weren't going right, stress was building up, and ended up having to take 2 days off. On the first day I really beat myself up, like, oh, I want to be at work, but then the second day I was like, no, I need this time. So it's important to remember not to beat yourself up. So thank you for that, Vanessa.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we are a little bit over time, but there's just been so much great information. I didn't want to cut this short, so I hope that everybody got a lot out of it. I want to thank all the viewers for watching. Be sure to share your thoughts, comments and questions in the comment space below, and give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. And be sure to check out all of our amazing panelists and their blogs to see what they're up to. It's been a real blast being with you here today, and a lot of people won't know, but these ladies really do practice what they preach in terms of stress management. We had a lot of technical issues before this show, and all of them are so calm and placid. Makes it a pleasure to work with. So thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you, Rory.
Thank you, Rory.
All right, well, it's been a pleasure being with you again today. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you next time.